So I want to talk about the word any for a little bit. Any can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes it's clear that it should be translated as a universal quantifier, and sometimes it's clear that it should be translated as an existential quantifier, and other times it's not clear which it should be. Now, for the purposes of the next set of examples, I want to restrict the universe of discourse just to the cats. So we're going to cross out "and the dogs" at the kennel. We could probably get rid of the C predicate for "is a cat" and the D predicate for "is a dog," but we don't really have to. We'll just leave them there. So we'll just be dealing with all the cats at the kennel. So consider these three English statements. So we have all the female cats are orange. Every female cat is orange. Any cat that is female is orange. Now it's pretty clear that for each of these we've got an all FRG statement. And we can translate it as usual with a universal quantifier. For every x, and remember we've restricted the universe of discourse to just the cats, so we don't need to take account of that in the translation. For every x, if it's female, then it is orange. Female is the F part of the standard all F's are G's translation, and orange is the G part of the standard all F are G translation. And all, every, and any are each working as a universal quantifier here. So there's a case where any pretty clearly functions as a universal quantifier. Consider the following examples. So we have two similarly worded but importantly different statements here. The top of the new two says, if all the cats are female, then Poozy is. The bottom one says, if any of the cats is female, then Poozy is. Let's see how these are translated and then talk about the difference. In each case, it is the if, then that is going to be the main operator of the translation into symbols. What the first one is saying is, if all the cats are female, then this particular cat, Poozy, is, and that is obviously true. If it is the fact that all the cats are female, then Poozy is a female as well. If for every x, fx, then, in particular, p is f, fp. Now consider the next one. If any of the cats is female, then Poozy is. This says something slightly different. This tells us something that's not as obviously true. It tells us that if there's at least one cat which is female, then Poozy is one of those at least one cats. And that we symbolize with an existential. So what we have here is, if it's the case that there exists at least one female among these cats, then Poozy is one of those females. And that could be false. You could have Lily as the female, and maybe Poozy is male, and you can have a true antecedent and a false consequent there. That could never happen in this example, because either we have a false antecedent, there are some male cats, and the whole conditional winds up being true, or we have a true antecedent, in which case this has to also be true, because Poozy is one of the cats at the kennel, and you get a true. So there's no way for this top one to be false. In fact, what we'll see in the next chapter is that it's quantificationally true. It must be true. It's true in virtue of its quantificational structure. Here, however, we could have, say, Lily or some unnamed cat as the female cat, and Poozy be male, which would make this false. So we could easily have this statement false. So it's clear that something different is being said in the second example there. Technically, what we'll call that is quantificationally falsifiable, but you don't need to worry about that right now. So what makes the difference? Well, pretty clearly it's the use of any versus all. And in this particular case, the any functions as an existential quantifier, not a universal quantifier. I'll take a couple more examples to illustrate why this is the case. Okay, now I've saved 3 of the previous examples and repositioned them a bit and labeled them A, B, and C because I want to be able to refer back to them as we go forward here. As we mentioned a moment ago, the proper translation for C involves an existential quantifier in the antecedent of a conditional. So we could equally rephrase the English. If there is some female cat, then Poosie is female. So now it may seem like if we have an if-then statement with any in the antecedent, we have to use an existential. But consider this example, which I'll label D. So we have if any cat is female, then it is orange. You will notice that this is basically just a rephrasing of A here. And if that is the case, then we should translate it in the exact same way that we did for A. And in fact, we will. We wind up with, for all x, in parentheses, fx, then ox. The exact same translation as for A. So A and D are quantificationally equivalent. But note also that we have a pattern similar to C above. We have an if-then statement with any in the antecedent. And yet, we have a universal, not an existential, as in C. What's making the difference? What makes the difference is that in D, when we get to the consequent, there is a pronoun that's referring back to the quantified term in the antecedent. We call that pronominal cross-reference. What that means is, with the any in the antecedent, we need to use a universal quantifier. And to maintain the pronominal cross-reference from the consequent to the antecedent, we need these parentheses to extend all the way across the translation. And so we get an all FRG form statement for D. In contrast, in C, there is no pronoun in the consequent that refers back to anything in the antecedent. It's just not there. This can happen for a number of reasons, but in this particular case it's happening because we wind up talking about a particular cat, not talking about the quantified variable x. So what we have is a general principle that when we have a conditional with any in the antecedent, if there is no pronominal cross-reference, as in example C here, then we treat it as an existential quantifier. Whereas if there is pronominal cross-reference, as in D here, the any is treated as a universal quantifier. Now this isn't all there is to say about any. Let's clear these examples and take a look at one more wrinkle. Again, just to keep things simple, we'll leave the dogs out of the interpretation for the time being. Take this example. Not any cat is spotted. Ask yourself, how many cats are spotted? Clearly, it's none of them. And since we've eliminated the dogs from the universe of discourse here, we can translate this as a simple none statement. It's not the case that there exists an x where that x is spotted. We could also have something like this. Not any of the female cats are bigger than Spike. Again, this is really a none sentence. And so we can translate it accordingly. It's not the case that there exists a cat that is female and bigger than Spike. So what we're seeing here is that in the case of a negated any, that is equivalent to a negated existential.